It was a moment considered unimaginable in 21st century America. The U.S. Supreme Court eliminating the constitutional right to abortion. The bans were immediate, along with the horror stories of shuttered clinics and women denied emergency medical care.
I'll never forget one of the doctors just ripping off his gloves, throwing them at the trash and saying, "I can't help you anymore. You have to go out of state."
Almost a year later, the landscape of abortion access is even worse. Republicans remain focused on pushing restrictive laws that Americans overwhelmingly reject.
The body inside of the mom's body is not her body, not her body, not her choice.
The Supreme Court may have empowered the states to reshape abortion law, but reproductive rights remain a national issue that the Biden-Harris administration and Congress must respond to forge a roadmap for the work that lies ahead. Tonight, from Dallas, in a state considered ground zero in the national fight over abortion rights, this is 1 Year Post Roe, a Reidout special with Vice President Kamala Harris.
Hello, and thank you for joining me on this special edition of The Reidout. My guest for the hour is Vice President Kamala Harris. But because this is such an important issue to so many Americans, we also wanted to bring around this table people whose lives and work were directly affected by the elimination of the right to an abortion. Joining me are Genesis Sanchez, an abortion rights advocate, Amanda Zarowski, lead plaintiff in the abortion access lawsuit against the state of Texas, Shannon Brewer, executive director of the Las Cruces Women's Health Center in New Mexico, and Dr. Todd Ivey, who is an OBGYN right here in the state of Texas. I want to thank all of you for being here, but I do want to start with you, Madam Vice President. And we know this is a big news cycle. There's lots of news going on. But we really wanted to focus on this because this was a huge loss, I think, for so many people. And I appreciate you being here for this conversation. But I would love to know first how you felt, not only as the first woman Vice President of the United States, but also as a former prosecutor, as a mamala to two lovelies, as an auntie, as a woman, as an American, to that moment when you knew that Roe was gone.
So, Joy, first of all, thank you for bringing us together for this incredibly important conversation 4 days before we will recognize 1 year since the Dobbs decision came down. I was actually that day when I heard that the highest court in our land took a constitutional right from the women of America, from the people of America. I was that day on my way from D.C. to Illinois to do an event on maternal mortality with Lauren Underwood. Because, you know, the irony of that moment couldn't be more clear in terms of the disconnect between those who are fighting to attack this right and deprive people of this privacy right, and those who also have not been leaders on an issue like maternal mortality. But I was on my way to Illinois, and, you know, in the litany of things that I am, including a mamala and all of the other things, I'm also someone who was motivated to become a lawyer because of people like Thurgood Marshall. One of my inspirations was RBG, and the idea that the highest court in our land just did that and rolled back rights that had been recognized was incredibly shocking. I knew it might happen. The decision had been leaked. I called my husband, I called Doug immediately then, because he was the only one that I could really just like let it out with. Words not for television at this moment. But again, you know, the thing about our nation, I believe, one of the strengths of our nation is, yes, we are a work in progress. And the progress we have made, one of the attributes has been about our collective fight for the expansion of rights. And this was such a stark restriction of rights that had been recognized. And I immediately knew when that decision came down what it would mean for real people almost immediately in our country, who, for the most part, many will suffer in silence and are alone and without resources of many types. And I was extremely sad for that reason as well. when that decision came down. Angry, you know, and extremely sad about what it would mean for real people.
You know, and I know that, you know, there is the great inspiration of Thurgood Marshall and all of the great jurists that have been on the court in the past. But I also have seen an interview with your high school best friend.
Yes.
Who talked about your other inspiration for becoming a lawyer. Your best friend, when you were in high school, suffered incest in her home and ended up living with you and your mom and your sister because of it. And I just, you know, when you think about women who you were defending as a prosecutor, that they had been abused in the state of Texas and in the many other states that have now, through trigger laws or affirmatively banned abortion, a woman who was in the position of your best friend, if they tried to obtain an abortion as a result of being pregnant, in this state, there is a bounty that could be placed on them, a cash bounty on anyone who helped them. They could be committing a crime. Any doctor who helped them could go to jail for life and lose their license and be fined. I just wonder how you process that as a former prosecutor.
So you are correct. My best friend in high school, I learned that she was being molested by her stepfather. And I immediately said, well, you have to come live with us. And I called my mother and I told her, and my mother was like, of course she has to come live with us. And she did. She came to live with us. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to become a prosecutor, to protect people who have been the subject of such abuse. And most of my career as a prosecutor was focused on crimes against women and children, crimes of violence. And so one of the issues on the topic of the Dobbs decision is, to your point, laws being proposed and passed that make no exception, Joy, for rape and incest. And I'm going to be explicit about what that means. It means that so-called leaders are saying that after an individual has experienced such a crime of violence, a violation to their body, and surviving that these so-called leaders would say to that same person, and the next decision you make about your body is not yours either. That's immoral. That's immoral. To take away her ability to decide what happens to her body next. And so when I think about what is happening with these proponents of this approach, you know, I think that I think that one attribute of true leadership is to have some sense of empathy and understanding, as opposed to judgment, when people have had those kinds of experiences. And these are the things that are at play. And I do want to say, because I think it's very important to say, on this issue, one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree that the government should not be telling her what to do with her body.
Yeah. And, you know, sitting beside you is Shannon Brewer. And, you know, when people talk about the end of Roe, they usually say the end of Roe, or they just say Dobbs. But the second half of that case is Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. And I have a picture of Jackson Women's Health. It was the pink house. It was the last abortion clinic in Mississippi, not just in Jackson, Mississippi, but in the state. And it was your lawsuit against the state for eliminating access to abortion that winds up being this case, Dobbs versus Jackson, Mississippi, that triggers the end of abortion rights. And I you know, and we're looking just at this image of the house that it is now in a consignment shop. I remember driving by it not long ago and seeing it and being sort of shocked when someone told me that was the pink house.
Yes.
And I wonder in that moment when you heard that Dobbs was gone, how you felt.
I felt like we had gone back in time, actually. That's what I felt. And still to this day, that's what I feel. I feel we've let women down. We've set things back so far, and it's going to take forever to get it back. If that ever happens again, it won't be in our lifetime. That's how I felt at that time. I felt that all the fighting we had done was all in vain at that moment. It was just, you have all types of feelings when that took place. From staff, friends, doctors, escorts, everybody who helped with the movement. It was very emotional for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of you, I think of TRM Howe. I am back with Vice President Kamala Harris and our wonderful panel. We want to talk what happens next. We are awaiting a ruling on the idea of whether mifepristone can be banned. There is a Texas federal judge who has said it should be banned. What are the implications if that ban stands up to Supreme Court scrutiny?
Joy, the implications are profound. So let's step back and understand. Essentially what this lawsuit is doing is attacking the ability of the FDA to determine what is safe and healthy for the American people to use, as has been prescribed by a doctor. Now, contextually, understand the FDA has been doing this for 80-plus years. And their process is it is medically reviewed, scientists, peer-reviewed, and they take it very seriously. And when they make a decision something is safe and effective, it is because it is actually safe and effective. Right. Mifepristone, they made that decision about that medication 20 years ago. Right. And it has been proven to be safe and effective for its prescribed use for those 20 years. These folks who are politicians are now encouraging lawyers to encourage a judge, not a medical doctor, to decide and put in place their judgment over the judgment of the FDA. I ask people, you should, if you understand what this means, understand that you ought to go and look in your medicine cabinet and look at the drugs the medications that you may have there. Could be anything from insulin to what you need for blood pressure, chemotherapy drugs are arguably up to attack. This is so wide-sweeping and wide-ranging in terms of the implications. And it is also another example of how we are in the midst of a healthcare crisis, where we are literally at a place where politicians urging lawyers, by the way, they forum shopped in finding that judge, are trying to replace the decisions of medical professionals about a medication that is prescribed and is safe and effective for its use. The implications are frightening. So we're fighting this at the moment state by state. It could soon, though, be national. But let's start with state by state. Rachel Sweet.
Yes.
You are headed to Ohio.
Yeah.
How do we do this state by state?
Yeah, so I'm really honored to be working with the team over at Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom. Please check out their website, ohioansforreproductivefreedom.org. But as we were discussing before the break, abortion ballot measures went 5 for 5 in 2022. We know that if the American people are given the opportunity to vote on this issue, they will stand united and protect the right to abortion. The problem is our opposition also knows that. And so instead of just attacking abortion rights, they are also waging war on direct democracy, on the initiative petition process, on the ability of states to even put this issue to a vote in 2023 and 2024. Ohio is a really great example. In August, voters will have the opportunity to vote on issue 1, which is a constitutional amendment that would make it so that all future ballot measures must pass with a 60% majority instead of a simple majority. And that was placed on the ballot specifically to make things harder for the reproductive freedom measure in November of 2023. So it's just a good reminder for all of us that there is so much intersection with these issues, with voting rights, with direct democracy. And we have to use every single tool in our toolbox to make sure that we protect our rights.
And Annie Renaud, how do we have these conversations with people who have a moral objection to abortion?
I think that the key is really keeping it in that realm of the right to medical privacy, which is what Roe was really about to begin with. My daughter had a ruptured appendix a couple of months ago, had a surgery, had an abscess come back like a couple of weeks later, had a second surgery. And in that process, we were in the hospital room talking with her surgeon, talking with her doctors about the different choices that, they were going to make in her care, where we had choices in her care and whatnot. I can't even imagine the ludicrous of having politicians in that room with us, dictating what choices we can make about that. And that's not even anything as consequential as pregnancy and childbirth and all of that. So, just keeping it in the realm of medical privacy.
It keeps it very simple.
Yeah.
And Genesis, how do we make sure that people understand this nexus between the right to vote, between their need for medical privacy?
Yeah, well, I'll speak to what you said. You know, Roe v. Wade was about the right to privacy. And so when you start to talk about here are all the things that could go away, here are all the things that are coming down, I think that motivates people to either vote or to mobilize in their communities. And something that we know to be true, generations before us we know now, is that you cannot ban abortion. You can only ban safe abortion.
That's right.
And so people are still going to seek care, and that's only going to get more and more dangerous. And so I encourage people to continue to donate to their local abortion fund so we can fly Texans to New Mexico and get that care that they need.
And you're going to keep fighting?
Yeah, we're just going to keep opening clinics. We're just going to keep, every time they close them down, we're going to
open another one.
Yeah. But we've opened 3 in a year's time, so we're just determined that women are going to have access no matter what.
Amen.
That's the whole thing.
Freedom is very hard to take away from people, Vice President Harris. It makes people focus. They're focused.
Yeah.
How is the administration going to respond to this moment?
Right. Well, on the mifepristone issue, for example, we are fighting in the courts. We're going to keep fighting, because we also know that the majority of folks who receive this kind of care receive it through mifepristone. And so we are dealing with that. We are fighting on also the point that is a fundamental point. No one, regardless of their gender or condition, should be denied access to emergency health care.
Right.
So in our previous panel, for example, we talked with Amanda. No one should be denied that. So we are fighting in the courts as it relates to that. But also we are fighting on the issue of patient privacy. This is absolutely about the private decisions that an individual should be able to make in consultation with their healthcare professional and not worry about that information becoming public or being used, for example, by law enforcement.
Right.
And so one of the things that we are doing is fighting against law enforcement having access to this private information for the sake of criminalizing someone who just essentially wants health care. But, I'll say, Joy, the bottom line is this. We have got to understand the connection between this issue and elections. Elections matter. We've seen that in the work that has been done in the various states. We need a United States Congress who understands and appreciates the exact point that has been made at this table. It is the individual right, the privacy right of people to make this decision, not having their government make this decision for them.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something. Our president, Joe Biden, when that legislation gets passed to codify and put in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, Joe Biden will sign it.
All right.
So let's make sure everybody that you know is registered to vote, like you were talking about. Let's make sure that people understand the power of their voice on this, because we've seen how it has an impact. And so much of this discussion that you brought us together for is about really fully appreciating that this is not some conceptual issue.
That's right.
It's about real people every day who, for the most part, are silently suffering. And we as a society that should care enough to vote.
Amen. Well, I want to thank, on that note, amen. You can get an amen even though it is not Sunday.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Tell your neighbor.
Tell your neighbor. I want to thank the Honorable Kamala Harris for making the time. Vice President of the whole United States, who came and sat at this wonderful table with us, and all of our incredible guests tonight for this very enlightening discussion. That is tonight's Readout from Dallas, Texas. Thank y'all for tuning in.